Welcome back to Farmhouse DIY, where we turn the ordinary into something beautifully lived in. In today's episode, we're diving into 16 timeless farmhouse decor ideas that are not only inspiring, but entirely achievable on a budget. From repurposed ladders to forgotten dresser drawers, each piece carries a quiet story and a second chance. Here, you'll find beauty in brushstrokes, meaning in texture, and warmth in the everyday. So if you love design that feels real, decor that whispers instead of shouts, make sure to subscribe to Farmhouse DIY for more soulful DIY inspiration, delivered weekly. Let's begin, slowly and intentionally, one idea at a time. At Farmhouse DIY, we find beauty not in the new, but in the nearly forgotten. This dresser was tucked away behind old paint cans and tangled cords. It had lost its sheen, its purpose, but not its charm. We brought it into the light and began gently sanding back the years. The grain of the wood peeked through like old memories resurfacing. We chose a muted chalk white, not to cover its past, but to soften it, like lace over weathered stone. The drawers were removed one by one, revealing the frame's honest structure. We added pine boards for shelving, lined each shelf with faded floral fabric, polished a few antique knobs we found in a thrift shop bin. Now, it sits proudly in the corner of a small kitchen, filled with oats, dried lavender, and a jar of yesterday's tea. A gingham curtain hangs shyly in front. It didn't cost much. Just a little time, some care, and the willingness to see something old as useful again. That's the soul of farmhouse decor. Simple things, quietly reimagined. At Farmhouse DIY, we've learned that sometimes the most beloved pieces begin as forgotten relics. This old ladder came from the back of a shed, its wood bleached by sun, its rungs unsteady. Once, it may have led someone to a rooftop, a loft, or an attic filled with stories. We didn't fix it to climb. We fixed it to remember. Each step was sanded by hand, the grain coaxed back into clarity. We brushed it with a soft ash stain, just enough to mute the scars without hiding them. A whisper of history remains in every nick and scratch. We placed it in a quiet corner of the living room, where light spills in gently in the late afternoon. Over each rung, we draped quilts, some hand-stitched, others found at weekend markets, each with its own pattern of comfort. And just like that, the ladder was no longer about height. It became a gesture, a place for warmth, for softness, for pause. You don't need much to do the same. An old ladder, a few hours, and the intention to turn the ordinary into something that gently holds space in your home. There's a particular kind of joy that comes with painting something by hand. watching color transform the plain into the poetic. At Mod House DIY, we don't rush that process. We embrace it, one stroke at a time. These jars came from an old crate in the garage. Some cloudy, some chipped, all waiting for a purpose. We didn't see trash. We saw potential. We chose colors that reminded us of soft mornings. Sage green like the first leaves, muted peach like early sunlight, and baby blue like washed linen drying on a line. The paint didn't need to be perfect. In fact, we hoped it wouldn't be. We wanted the brush strokes to show, like memory trails, honest and alive. Once dried, we filled them with flowers. Nothing extravagant. Just what we had on hand. Lavender from the back fence, tulips from yesterday's errand, and wild chamomile from the ditch down the road. We placed the jars across the windowsill, on the table, near the sink. They didn't shout for attention, but when the light hit just right, they glowed. And in those small glows, we found the soul of spring. At Mod House DIY, we believe stories aren't just told, they're carried. Sometimes in paper, sometimes in wood, and sometimes in an old suitcase with scuffed corners and rusted locks. We found ours at a thrift store. It was buried beneath old curtains, smelling faintly of dust and time. Inside were scratches, names written in pencil, and a faded lining with the tiniest floral print. Stories, perhaps. A table for tea and thought. With care, we cleaned its skin, not to make it new, but to reveal its spirit. We measured and attached 4 wooden legs, not too polished, not too tall. Inside, we relined the base with soft cotton, something gentle enough to hold memories. Farmhouse design is at its best. The art of making something from almost nothing with heart. Somewhere in a salvage yard, half buried under broken tiles and fallen leaves, lay an old wooden door. We didn't know where it came from, perhaps an entry to a cottage, or a pantry door where family recipes once whispered from memory. But we knew what it could be. At Mod House DIY, we see old doors not as barriers, but as invitations. We brought it home gently, like carrying a fragile secret. The hinges stayed. So did the nicks and nail holes. We sanded just enough to coax out the grain, leaving behind the layers of paint like sedimentary stories. In the bedroom, we placed it behind the bed, not to dominate the space, but to give it depth. A backdrop of character. A frame for dreams. We didn't add much. Just a dried wreath near the top, and a lamp whose light spilled softly across its weathered face. At night, when the room quiets down, It's as if the door exhales, a long sigh of something remembered. This is farmhouse design. Letting something once forgotten become the heart of a room, again. It didn't ask to be perfect. It only asked to be useful. One more time. At Mod House DIY, we find ourselves drawn to the smallest things, the ones that others might overlook. Like lace doilies tucked into a drawer, forgotten, yellowed with time. They were once made by hand, stitched by quiet stitch. Someone's grandmother. A neighbor. A stranger who had time to spare and thread to spare it with. We gathered a few. Some inherited, others rescued from thrift shops. They weren't all perfect. A tear here, a fray there. But we saw beauty in that imperfection. With old picture frames we found in the attic. We began placing each doily carefully, like preserving pressed flowers. We backed them with soft linen, ironed them flat, and sealed them gently under glass. On the wall they became more than patterns. They became poetry in cotton. Texture without noise. A story without words. They brought stillness to the room. Guests stopped, leaned in, asked questions. That's what handmade decor does. It invites you closer. You don't need a gallery budget to decorate beautifully. Just thread, light, and the patience to see detail in the quiet. There's a certain kind of charm in objects that once held something else. Apple crates, wine boxes, old wooden bins. At Mod House DIY, we look at these not as leftovers, but as building blocks for beauty. We found ours stacked in a flea market corner, their sides worn by years of use. Once they held fruit. Now they hold light and space. We cleaned them gently, just enough to lift the dust, not the story. A coat of warm-toned stain brought out the grain like sunlight on old skin. Then we began to style. One crate became a shelf for dried chamomile and old seed catalogs. Another held mismatched mugs and a single sprig of eucalyptus in a jar. No two crates were the same. No two shelves were either. That's the wonder of it. In the unevenness, we found rhythm. In the odd angles we found balance. Now, the corner that once held nothing holds everything we love in small, useful doses. And just like that, a forgotten space becomes a quiet invitation. Because good design doesn't shout. It whispers. And crates, humble as they are, have so much to say. Mod House DIY, we believe that fabric carries stories. Stories of Sunday lunches, quiet mornings, and hands that worked without hurry. We found a pile of forgotten linen in the back of the cupboard. Frayed. Stained. Still soft as breath. Instead of tossing it, we leaned closer, wondering what it might become. We cut a piece into a slipcover. Not precise. Not stiff. Just enough to dress a wooden chair in something gentle. We stitched by hand, adding tiny ruffles where the fabric fell too short. There was no rush. Only rhythm. Another piece we trimmed into a runner. The edges were uneven, so we hemmed them with simple lace. When we laid it across the table, it caught the afternoon light like a memory. Linen has this way of softening a space, of making everything feel more lived in, more loved. These pieces didn't cost a thing, but they brought the room together in a way that money rarely can. That's the heart of farmhouse decor. Not perfection, but presence. Not newness, but nuance. And in every stitch, we found a little more of ourselves. There are pieces that greet you before a word is spoken. And sometimes all it takes is a milk can. At Mod House DIY, we love items that were once purely practical. This one came from a roadside stand. Tall, dented, and cold to the touch. Once it carried cream. Now, it carries the soul of the home. We didn't do much. Just cleaned it gently, preserving the rust like freckles of time. We stenciled a quiet welcome across its belly and filled it with eucalyptus. Its soft scent rising like a memory when the door swings open. It now stands just to the right of the entryway. Beside it, an old stool holds garden shoes. A hook above carries a canvas tote, still dusted with soil. When guests arrive, they see it first. It doesn't sparkle. It doesn't boast. But it speaks of care, of roots, of rhythm, of mornings that begin in stillness. This is farmhouse decor at its most honest. Taking what was once for labor and letting it become a gesture of rest. Because when the outside world is full of noise, even a milk can offer peace. We often think of storage as something hidden, something tucked away. But at Mod House DIY, we believe even storage can tell a story. We started with a blank wall and a handful of baskets. Some wire, some woven, all found at thrift shops with dust still clinging to the corners. Each one had its own rhythm, its own texture. We didn't match them. We didn't need to. We embraced the mix, soft and strong, curved and square. We mounted them on a plank we had left from an old shutter project, spacing them by eye, not ruler. One held linen napkins and mismatched cloths. Another cradled dried rosemary and a folded grocery list. A third welcomed incoming mail and seed packets. Suddenly, what was once blank became beautiful. Not because it was perfect, but because it was useful and real. There's something deeply satisfying in turning utility into intimacy. In farmhouse decor, beauty doesn't come from excess. It comes from arranging what you already have with heart. Even a basket can be a frame for everyday poetry. Some stories are written on paper. Others are whispered through wood grain. At Mod House DIY, we often find ourselves surrounded by scraps. Planks from old shelves, broken crates, even fallen branches. It's tempting to throw them away. But sometimes when laid side by side, they become something entirely new. We gathered a few. No two were the same. Some had nail holes. Others carried years of weathering. We brushed them gently, just enough to take off the dust, not the history. With each stroke of whitewash, we didn't cover, we revealed. A soft leaf motif. A shadow of lavender. A knot shaped like a heart. We let the texture lead the design. Once the piece was done, we hung it above a bench in the hallway. Guests pause when they walk in. They run their fingers across the surface, as if reading something. It cost nothing, and yet it adds everything. Warmth, grounding, a touch of imperfection that makes a house feel truly lived in. That's what rustic art is. Not a statement. A whisper. We see things differently at Mod House DIY. Especially old windows. To most, this one was junk. Its panes missing, its wood cracked, its usefulness gone. But we saw a frame for reflection. Not just of light but of life. We cleaned the frame gently, careful not to disturb the layers of paint that told their own quiet story. Sage beneath white. White beneath wood. We measured mirror glass for each empty pane and secured them in place. Suddenly, the broken frame didn't look broken at all. It looked full. It caught the room in pieces. A flicker of candlelight, a corner of ivy, the curve of a chair's arm. We added vintage hooks at the base. Now it holds keys, scarves, sometimes even sprigs of herbs drying in the sun. There's something quietly poetic about a window that no longer opens, yet still lets in light. We hung it in the hallway, and every time we pass, we see a new angle of something familiar. It's a reminder that beauty doesn't come from being whole. It comes from being repurposed with love. Sometimes, the best ideas begin with the question, what if we didn't throw that away? At Farmhouse, we found an old shutter leaning behind a shed, the wood soft with age, the paint flaking off like bits of memory. We brought it inside, not to restore it fully, but to give it a gentler ending. We brushed off the dust and gave it a light coat of sage paint, letting the layers underneath peek through. Across the slats, we clipped twine and tiny clothespins. Not just for paper, but for life. A dried marigold, a thank you note from a neighbor, a to-do list in fading ink. We added a few hooks for hanging keys and a pouch made from linen scraps to hold pens and stray receipts. The whole thing took an afternoon. Now it lives by the kitchen door, where things come and go, reminders, thoughts, tiny anchors. It's a memo board, yes. But more than that, it's a place where the mundane becomes tender. Where notes feel like gestures. Where home speaks softly. And all it took was a shutter, and the decision to notice its potential. At Farmhouse DIY, we find that even the smallest vessels can hold light. It started with a teacup, cracked, forgotten, delicate as memory. One of those odd pieces you find in the back of a cabinet, unmatched and lovely. We melted soy wax slowly, mixing it with dried lavender and a drop of vanilla. The scent rose like a memory of gardens and childhood kitchens. We placed the wick in the center and poured carefully, holding the cup steady with both hands. There was something ritualistic in it, something old-fashioned and tender. When the wax cooled, we lit the candle. It burned quietly, throwing soft light across the table. It didn't shout. It glowed. Later, we wrapped one up with a note. Here's a little light. We gave it to a neighbor. And just like that, a teacup that once served tea now served warmth in a different way. That's the beauty of crafting with intention. The ability to turn forgotten things into gentle gestures. Light into something you can hold. Because sometimes, what we make is less about the object, and more about the kindness it carries. Not everything needs a full makeover. Sometimes, the smallest wrap can change everything. At Farmhouse DIY, we've come to love burlap, not for its elegance, but for its honesty. We found it folded in a drawer, beside spools of twine and a few forgotten buttons. Rough to the touch, frayed at the edges. But there's charm in that kind of texture. We cut a strip and wrapped it around a simple glass jar. It wasn't fancy. But as we tied it with a bough of twine, added a pressed daisy, and tucked in a note, it felt like a gesture, a soft kind of beauty. Inside the jar, tulips stood tall, their stems crisscrossing in the light. We placed it on the table, beside the breadboard and the jam jar. Suddenly, the table looked finished. It's strange how something so modest can carry such presence. Burlap doesn't pretend to be something it's not. It just wraps what's already lovely in something earthy, grounded. And that's what farmhouse style is about. Decor that feels like it grew there, that arrived not with a flourish, but with a whisper. Mod House DIY, we're always looking twice, especially at things most would toss. This drawer was part of an old vanity, the kind that once held hairpins, handkerchiefs, and maybe a perfume bottle or two. Its sides were scratched, the base warped slightly, but the structure held steady. We gave it a light sanding, just enough to soften the sharpness. Inside, we lined it with a faded wallpaper remnant, roses and vines in washed-out pink. Two brass handles turned it into something new. A tray not just for carrying, but for curating. We placed it on the coffee table first, with a candle, a book, and a ceramic dish of dried herbs. Later, it made its way to the breakfast table, holding a teapot and fresh scones. Each time it moved, it changed its purpose, but never lost its soul. That's the gift of upcycling. The quiet ability to turn something once tucked away into the center of a room. A drawer is meant to hold things, but sometimes, it's meant to hold stories.